I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. Today, a song on the battlefields of a war of liberation. This is John Brown's body. Welcome to Dictators v Democrats, Songs of Freedom, where we dive into the history of liberation music throughout time. And if you like this work, then go ahead and like, share, subscribe, and hit that Liberty Bell. To understand John Brown's body as a song of freedom, we first have to meet the man, or one of the men, behind the name and the tune. John Brown, the abolitionist, is who most people think of when they hear this tune. He was born in 1800 in Torrington, Connecticut. Raised in a deeply religious household, he was instilled with a sense of moral duty and an unflinching belief that slavery is an abomination. Over decades, Brown became known as a radical abolitionist, willing to act where others hesitated. And act he did. John Brown was a freedom fighter with an emphasis on fighter. He knew that the only way to deal with slavers was with the finality of a 44. He participated in the Underground Railroad, helped enslaved people escape, and moved to Kansas in the 1850s to fight the spread of slavery. There, he led an armed anti-slavery militia in the violent conflict known as Bleeding Kansas. Brown's most famous action, though, came in 1859 at Harpers Ferry, Virginia, where he attempted to seize a federal armory to arm enslaved people for a revolt. The raid failed, and he was captured and later executed. And in a historic twist of irony, he was captured by US Marines led by none other than Robert E. Lee, who later turned traitor himself and led Confederate forces in their pro-slavery rebellion. And to many in the North, Brown became a martyr, a man who sacrificed his life for freedom. To the South, he was a terrorist, and his actions polarized the United States and helped set the stage for the Civil War. And those words I said at the start were passed in a note to one of the executioners when he was hanged, and they are prophetic. But it's this moral courage, this willingness to act decisively against systematic injustice that makes John Brown a figure worthy of song, one who is still in many ways controversial today. And yet the song that bears his name didn't initially emerge as a straightforward tribute to his abolitionist legacy. And that's really interesting about this and about so many of the other songs of freedom. They don't really start that way. And this song was about a man called John Brown, but it wasn't John Brown the abolitionist. It emerged with the Massachusetts 12th Regiment. One of the soldiers there, a sergeant from Scotland, was literally named John Brown. Short, stocky, and burdened by a knapsack which looked comically large on his frame, his fellow soldiers teased him mercilessly, being well aware of John Brown the abolitionist. According to the story, a group of soldiers arrived late to their bunks and they asked their fellow soldiers if anything new had happened. One replied jokingly, "John Brown's dead," to which another responded to the tune of a camper's song, "Say, brother, can you meet us?" But his soul goes marching on. And this caught on immediately and became a marching tune. Soldiers of the 12th creating verses like "John Brown's knapsack is strapped upon his back, and his soul will march as far as any of you." And the song quickly spread through the regiment. It's catchy, easy to sing while marching, and adaptable. Soldiers could add verses reflecting victories, leaders, or jokes. Importantly, the original incarnation had almost no abolitionist content. Only a line like "He is gone to be a soldier of the Lord" hinted at any sort of moral undertones. Although tragically, the original Sergeant John Brown died in the early days of the war, drowned in the Shenandoah River at Front Royal, Virginia. The song stuck, though. And it was this that earned them the name the Psalm-Singing Regiment from Boston. The Northern observers were struck. A reporter in New York noted, Quote, who would have dreamed that 1,000 men in the streets of New York would be heard singing reverently and enthusiastically in praise of John Brown? Because when people heard it, they didn't think it was about Sergeant John Brown, the Scotsman. They thought it was about John Brown, the abolitionist, the freedom fighter, who died after Harpers Ferry. And for the soldiers, though, it was a morale booster and a jab at the Confederates because they didn't know the difference either. It was a flexible song, not necessarily a moral or political statement at this stage. But after leaving Boston in July of 1861, the 12th Massachusetts marched south. They sang John Brown's body publicly in parades in Baltimore, as I said, in New York, and eventually on the battlefield. And it became popular not just with them, but with soldiers from other regiments who added their own verses, sometimes to reflect their war aims and sometimes from their own experience. And here's one. Brave, McClellan is our leader now, we'll hang Jeff Davis on a sour apple tree. And German-American units who'd recently arrived from Germany created their own verses invoking the failed 1848 revolutions. Sind sie Deutsche und wir kämpfen für die Freiheit der Union. And African-American soldiers added their own verses celebrating their role in the fight. Oh, we're the bully soldiers of the 1st of Arkansas. We're fighting for the Union, we're fighting for the law. This song evolved to suit each singer's experience and mission. And sometimes, ironically, even Confederate soldiers could be heard singing it without any overt abolitionist content. Although more often than not, when Confederate soldiers heard it, they'd respond with anger and, on occasion, cannon fire. But as the war went on, many Union soldiers began to identify more with the abolitionist cause, especially as they marched south and came to see the full horrors of slavery with their own eyes. So while this song began as a playful jest, the very name John Brown carried historical and moral weight. And that's kind of why it was funny in the first place. And the song became more and more about John Brown, the abolitionist, and freedom, liberation in general. Just as the Union's War began as an effort to put down insurrection, then changed to a moral duty and a war of liberation, so did the song. And after John Brown's execution, he had become a martyr in the cause of abolition, and remains so to this day. A figure whose courage and sacrifice inspired admiration across the North and more as they marched south to Union soldiers. And observers noted that the soldiers seemed to embody his spirit in their own acts of bravery. A Massachusetts chaplain wrote, quote, "The daring and manliness of that old man eclipses his fault, and he has become a hero." And a nurse similarly reflected, quote, "The spirit of John Brown does seem to march along wonderfully fast, and our troops are becoming imbued with it to a greater extent than is generally supposed." Thus, John Brown's body began to bridge playful camp humor and then a moral cause for abolition, even if this was unintentional at first or even a part of the joke. And then the tune itself, a favorite of President Lincoln's, was adapted yet again by the poet Julia Ward Howe. Inspired by Massachusetts regiments singing the song, she rewrote it as, incredibly, the battle hymn of the Republic, imbuing it with a spiritual and emancipatory message. The battle hymn is one of the most famous songs that's come out of the United States and will undoubtedly be the focus of another episode. And other writers, like Edna Dean Proctor, added verses explicitly praising John Brown's sacrifice. John Brown died on a scaffold for the slave. Dark was the hour when he dug his hallowed grave. No God avenges the life he gladly gave. Freedom reigns today. And African-American civilians and soldiers adapted the song to mark the Emancipation Proclamation, singing it as they literally waited for the clock in Washington, D.C. to hit midnight and for the proclamation to come into force. The 1st of January next, 1863, so says the proclamation, the slaves will all be free. To every kindly heart 'twill be the day of jubilee, for the bond shall all go free. And through these adaptations, the song has now become inseparable from the moral cause it originally only jokingly hinted at, cementing its status as one of the true songs of freedom. By the end of the Civil War and today, John Brown's Body is absolutely about John Brown, the fiery preacher, freedom fighter, and martyr. It's an iconic anthem, a bridge between playfulness, military camp life, and dire moral purpose. And its melody grew to symbolize courage, sacrifice, and a fight for human freedom. And today, the soul of John Brown still marches on, a reminder that music and memory can carry the spirit of justice across generations. It is a tragedy, then, that despite the victory over slavery in the Civil War, the promises then made were broken. But 10 years after, white supremacy began to reign again in the Jim Crow South. The Ku Klux Klan, lynchings, Jim Crow laws, and enormous repressions that would last, well into the 20th century and today. I believe John Brown would look at America today, a country which I have a great fondness for and lived in for some time, and he would still find it wanting. We will end with the words he spoke during his sentencing in 1859. If it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice, and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children, and with the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit, so let it be done. This has been Songs of Freedom, John Brown's Body, and his soul does go marching on. If you enjoy this work, and if you want to hear more like it, please do like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. Always remember, freedom is non-negotiable. And now, John Brown's Body, performed by the great American songwriter and activist, Peter Seeger.
John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. But his soul goes marching on. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down on the grave of old John Brown. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. He captured Harpers Ferry with his 19 men so true. He frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hanged him for a traitor, they themselves the traitor crew. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Well, he's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. He's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. He's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord, but his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Mine eyes hath seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath is stored. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, his soul goes marching on.